Everyone thought Eleanor Vance was simply unraveling from the crushing weight of grief, but the chilling static coming from the nursery dresser proved otherwise. What started as faint, rhythmic breathing over a vintage baby monitor soon shattered her reality when a voice from deep inside the drywall whispered a name that shouldn't be there. As the temperature plunges and the house begins to shift, Ellie is forced to choose between the protective logic of the man she loves and a heartbreaking hidden past that refuses to stay buried. Will breaking the walls save her family, or will it release the very shadows they are trying to hide? Don't miss a single second of this breathtaking mystery. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell right now so you never miss a brand new episode. Before we dive into the premiere, we would love to know where our amazing viewers are watching from today. What city are you tuning in from?
Let us know in the comments below so we can all get to know each other better. The heavy, suffocating silence of the old Victorian house on Willow Creek Lane was louder than any noise Eleanor Vance had ever heard. Standing in the middle of room 204, the room she had hastily converted into a nursery, Ellie stared down at her 6-month-old nephew, Liam, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib. At just 23, Ellie's world had completely shattered. Following the sudden, tragic passing of her older sister, she had inherited not just this sprawling, drafty historic estate, but also the immense responsibility of raising a child on her own. The grief felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest, leaving her hollowed out and utterly disconnected from the outside world. She looked out the window at the gray, overcast sky, feeling an intense wave of isolation. She was entirely alone in this unfamiliar town, trapped in a cycle of endless sleepless nights, formula bottles, and a profound, aching emptiness that no amount of comforting words could fix. Desperate to find a moment of peace, Ellie walked over to the wooden dresser and plugged in a vintage plastic audio baby monitor she had found in a box of old family belongings. The device hummed to life, emitting a steady, low stream of white noise that filled the quiet room. She took the receiver unit, her hands trembling slightly from sheer exhaustion, and stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind her. As she walked down the dimly lit corridor of the ancient house, the rhythmic sound of static followed her, a lonely soundtrack to her new reality. But just as she reached the top of the stairs, the steady hum of the monitor cracked violently. Ellie froze, holding her breath. Amidst the sharp hiss of the static, a faint, rhythmic sound emerged, the unmistakable sound of soft, shallow breathing that didn't match Liam's pace at all. The unmistakable sound of soft, shallow breathing that didn't match Liam's pace at all sent a sudden chill straight down Ellie's spine. She stood paralyzed at the top of the dark staircase, her fingers gripping the plastic receiver so tightly her knuckles turned white. The rhythm was too slow, too deep to belong to a 6-month-old infant. Shaking off the initial wave of panic, she convinced herself that the vintage device was simply picking up a stray radio frequency, or perhaps a neighbor's cordless phone from down the street. She quietly retraced her steps, pushing the heavy wooden door of room 204 open to find Liam still fast asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect, peaceful innocence. Yet, the moment she stepped inside, the eerie breathing over the speaker faded back into ordinary, dull static. Ellie let out a long breath she didn't realize she was holding, rubbing her exhausted eyes as the weight of her grief and sleep deprivation caught up with her. It was easy to imagine monsters in the dark when your mind was completely fractured by loss. She sat in the old rocking chair by the window, watching the shadows stretch across the floorboards as the moon climbed higher into the midnight sky. Every corner of this ancient house felt heavy with history, a stark contrast to the emptiness blooming inside her own heart. She wanted to feel safe, to feel connected to something again, but the silence of Willow Creek only offered isolation. Setting the monitor on the nightstand right beside her head, she finally closed her eyes, praying for a few hours of dreamless rest, entirely unaware that the white noise was beginning to shift once again. The white noise was beginning to shift once again, transforming from a steady hiss into a sharp metallic crackle that jolted Ellie wide awake. She sat upright in the rocking chair, the morning sun just barely peeking through the lace curtains of the nursery. Liam was awake now, quietly playing with his little plush bear in the crib, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. Ellie reached for the monitor, intending to turn the volume down, when a sudden drop in the frequency made her hand freeze midair. It wasn't static this time, nor was it the mysterious breathing from the night before. A soft, melodic voice, faint but terrifyingly clear, whispered through the small plastic speaker, cutting through the morning calm. "Julian," the voice murmured, the syllables stretching out like a gentle sigh from a forgotten dream. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the device, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound didn't carry the distant, tinny quality of a radio interference. It sounded incredibly intimate, as if someone were standing right behind the heavy drywall, speaking directly into the microphone. She approached the wall closest to the crib, placing her palm against the cold plaster, trying to rationalize the impossible. There were no neighboring houses close enough to trigger a signal like this, and the voice possessed a distinct, lonely sorrow that mirrored her own internal ache. For the first time since moving to the estate, the emptiness in her chest was replaced by a sharp, electric curiosity, mixed with an undeniable creeping dread that she could no longer ignore. An undeniable creeping dread that she could no longer ignore followed Ellie through the next few days, wrapping around her thoughts like a heavy fog. 2 nights later, a fierce thunderstorm rolled over the valley, casting long, dancing shadows across the nursery walls. Liam was completely inconsolable, his sharp cries echoing through the house as Ellie rocked him back and forth, her own tears of frustration and exhaustion spilling over. Nothing she did seemed to soothe him, and the overwhelming feeling of failure began to settle deep into her bones. Just as she felt ready to break down, the baby monitor on the dresser crackled to life, silencing Liam's cries almost instantly. Through the speaker came a soft, rhythmic humming, weaving a beautiful, melancholic lullaby that Ellie had never heard in her life. The melody was haunting, yet profoundly comforting, vibrating gently through the ancient floorboards of the room. Liam rested his small head against Ellie's shoulder, his eyes blinking heavily before finally closing in deep, peaceful slumber. Ellie stood absolutely still in the center of the room, listening to the invisible singer soothe her nephew when she herself had failed. A bizarre sense of gratitude mingled with her fear, making her question her own sanity in the quiet darkness. She looked at the blank wall, realizing that whatever was residing within the hidden spaces of this house wasn't trying to scare them, it was reaching out, sharing a piece of its own lonely existence with 2 broken souls who desperately needed comfort. 2 broken souls who desperately needed comfort were exactly what Caleb saw when he arrived at the front door the following afternoon. A local carpenter with a kind smile and calloused hands, Caleb had been hired by Ellie's late sister months ago to repair the porch stairs. Noticeably shaken and sporting dark circles under her eyes, Ellie invited him inside, offering a warm mug of tea as an excuse to have another adult around. As Caleb adjusted his tool belt and walked through the hallway, Ellie casually guided the conversation toward the history of the Victorian estate, trying to sound nonchalant. Caleb paused, wiping sweat from his forehead, his expression turning uncharacteristically serious as he looked up at the ceiling. He explained that the house had been built in the late 19th century and had once belonged to a prominent local family whose youngest son vanished without a trace decades ago. The community had searched the surrounding woods for weeks, but no clues were ever found, leaving the family heartbroken until they eventually moved away. Hearing this story made Ellie's stomach drop, the name from the monitor echoing vividly in her mind. She gripped her tea mug tightly, the pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to align in her thoughts. Caleb noticed her sudden paleness and gently warned her that old houses often retained the echoes of their past, advising her not to let the history of the walls overwhelm her fragile state of mind. The history of the walls overwhelm her fragile state of mind was a risk Ellie was now entirely willing to take. Armed with a flashlight and a newfound sense of purpose, she waited until Liam was down for his afternoon nap before returning to the nursery. She knelt by the far corner of the room, right where the voice seemed to resonate most strongly during the quiet hours of the night. Examining the baseboard, she noticed a slight gap between the wood and the plaster, as if it had been pulled away and clumsily pushed back into place long ago. With a small butter knife from the kitchen, she carefully pried the old molding loose, holding her breath as a gust of cold, musty air rushed out from the dark gap. She shone the flashlight into the narrow cavity between the studs, her eyes widening as the beam caught a flash of faded color amidst the dust. Reaching her fingers into the tight space, she pulled out a delicate, dusty blue silk ribbon, its edges frayed by time.
Brushing away the decades of grime, her heart stopped when she saw the elegant, handwritten embroidery stitched into the fabric. Julian. A wave of profound sadness washed over her, replacing any lingering fear with pure empathy for the lost child. This wasn't a trick of technology or a hallucination born of grief. It was a tangible anchor to a soul that had been forgotten by the world, waiting in the dark to be discovered. Waiting in the dark to be discovered, the house seemed to shift its energy as a massive autumn storm rolled into Willow Creek early the next morning. The wind howled through the eaves, and within hours, a loud snap outside signaled a fallen tree branch taking down the main power lines. The entire house plunged into a deep, shadows-draped gloom, leaving Ellie reliant on a few scented candles and the battery-operated receiver of the baby monitor. As she sat on the living room rug with Liam, trying to keep him entertained with wooden blocks, the monitor on the coffee table hissed violently. The voice returned, but the previous gentle cadence was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless whisper that made the hairs on Ellie's arms stand up. "Hide, Ellie, hide," the voice urged, using her actual name for the very first time, sending a jolt of pure electricity through her veins. "The storm brings the cold, and the shadows are looking for the open spaces." Ellie scooped Liam into her arms, backing into the corner of the room as the temperature around them dropped noticeably, their breath turning to mist in the sudden chill. She spoke back into the monitor, her voice trembling but determined, demanding to know what Julian meant and how he knew her name. The speaker only rattled with the sound of rushing wind from inside the wall, making her realize that the boundary separating her reality from Julian's world was beginning to fracture under the pressure of the storm. The boundary separating her reality from Julian's world was beginning to fracture under the pressure of the storm, forcing Ellie to accept the impossible. For the next hour, while the rain lashed against the window panes, she held the monitor close to her face, listening intently to the faint, crackling responses. Julian explained, in the innocent vocabulary of a young boy, that he wasn't a malicious entity, but rather a memory trapped in a pocket of time within the house. He recounted the afternoon of his disappearance, describing a game of hide-and-seek where he had discovered a small hidden panel behind the nursery closet that led into the architectural voids of the structure. He had crawled inside to find the perfect hiding spot, but the heavy, spring-loaded door had accidentally latched shut behind him, trapping him in total darkness. As Ellie listened to the tragic tale, tears streamed down her cheeks, her own experience with sudden, helpless loss, allowing her to connect deeply with Julian's lingering spirit. He confessed that he had spent decades shouting into the void, but no one had ever heard him until Ellie brought the vintage monitor into the room, which somehow acted as a bridge for his voice. The sheer weight of his loneliness broke something inside Ellie, dissolving her remaining skepticism. She promised the voice that she wouldn't abandon him, realizing that her purpose in this house was far greater than just surviving her own grief. Her purpose in this house was far greater than just surviving her own grief, a conviction she fiercely defended when Caleb returned the next morning to check on the storm damage. Seeing the Pride Away baseboard and the blue ribbon sitting on the kitchen table, Caleb grew deeply concerned, his practical mind struggling to accept Ellie's wild explanations. Sensing her absolute sincerity, however, he agreed to help her investigate the physical structure rather than dismissing her claims entirely. He drove down to the local town hall and retrieved the original 1890 architectural blueprints of the Victorian estate, spreading the large, yellowed papers across Ellie's living room floor. With a pencil in hand, Caleb traced the layout of the second floor, his fingers stopping abruptly over a strange, unmapped blank rectangle located directly behind the nursery wall. He looked up at Ellie, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and growing apprehension, confirming that a sealed, hollow architectural void definitely existed within the house. However, Caleb's structural expertise led him to a much more grounded and terrifying theory. If the space was accessible, someone else could be using it to live secretly inside the walls right now. This sudden accusation created a sharp rift of trust between them, as Ellie refused to believe the gentle voice that comforted Liam could belong to a dangerous intruder. A dangerous intruder was a threat Caleb refused to ignore, forcing Ellie into a corner where she had to make the ultimate choice. Caleb stood in the nursery with a heavy crowbar, determined to tear into the drywall to ensure there was no immediate physical danger to Ellie and the baby. Just as he raised the tool, the baby monitor let out a high-pitched, agonizing squeal that filled the entire room, causing Liam to burst into tears. "Please, no!" Julian's voice begged through the speaker, sounding more terrified than ever before. "If you break the seal, the darkness that kept me hidden will consume everything, and I won't be able to stay." Ellie immediately stepped between Caleb and the wall, her arms outstretched, shielding the plaster with her own body. Caleb pleaded with her to use logic, arguing that she was endangering her nephew over a ghost story, while Ellie's heart screamed at her to protect the fragile spirit that had saved Liam's sleep. She looked at Liam, who was pointing at the wall with a serene smile on his face, seemingly seeing something beyond the physical barrier. Caught in a paralyzing dilemma between Caleb's protective logic and her own profound emotional intuition, Ellie took a deep breath. She reached out and gently took the crowbar from Caleb's hands, deciding that if they were going to uncover the truth, they had to do it with care and respect, not through destruction. They had to do it with care and respect, not through destruction. But the house itself seemed to run out of patience as the atmosphere inside room 204 shifted dramatically. The air grew intensely bitter, thick with frost that instantly crystallized along the edges of the window panes and the wooden crib. The plastic baby monitor began to spark, its small LED lights flickering wildly, as if it were struggling against an immense surge of supernatural energy. Julian's voice returned over the static, no longer a quiet whisper, but a desperate, echoing cry that vibrated through the very floorboards beneath their feet. He warned Ellie that the temporal alignment allowing them to communicate was rapidly closing, and if the secret wasn't fully brought to light tonight, the hidden space would be sealed permanently by the house's shifting structure. The emotional pressure in the room became suffocating, forcing Caleb to realize that this phenomenon was far beyond anything logic could explain. He watched in silence as Ellie knelt on the freezing floor, her hands trembling as she pressed her forehead against the cold wall, listening to Julian's fading cries. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, a ticking clock that demanded immediate, definitive action before a piece of the past was lost forever. Ellie knew that the moment to hesitate had passed. She had to be brave, for Julian, for Liam, and for her own healing. She had to be brave for Julian, for Liam, and for her own healing, which gave her the strength to finally grasp the heavy hammer from Caleb's toolbox. Rejecting the violent force of the crowbar, she approached the wall with deliberate, controlled movements,
finding a soft spot in the plaster right above where the baseboard had been removed. With a deep intake of breath, she swung the hammer, the sharp impact shattering the old plaster and sending a cloud of white dust billowing into the nursery. Caleb immediately stepped forward, using his professional tools to carefully widen the breach without damaging the structural supports of the room. As the dust slowly settled under the beam of their flashlights, a narrow, dark opening was revealed, leading into a completely forgotten corridor hidden behind the drywall. A heavy scent of old cedar, dry paper, and decades of stillness drifted out into the room, making Ellie's heart race with anticipation. She didn't hesitate, gripping her flashlight tightly as she squeezed through the narrow opening, leaving Caleb to guard the nursery and a sleeping Liam. Stepping onto the creaking planks of the hidden passage, she felt as though she were walking straight into a time capsule, every step taking her further away from her current grief and deeper into the heart of a long-forgotten mystery. Every step taking her further away from her current grief and deeper into the heart of a long-forgotten mystery brought Ellie to the end of the narrow, dusty passage. Her flashlight beam illuminated a small triangular alcove tucked directly beneath the slope of the roof, completely untouched by the passage of time. There were no frightening sights or malevolent entities waiting for her. Instead, the space contained a small wooden chair, a scattering of faded comic books, and a rusted tin time capsule box. Ellie knelt carefully on the dusty floorboards, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid of the box, revealing its contents to the light. Inside lay a collection of childhood treasures, a tin toy car, a handful of colorful marbles, and a leather-bound diary with Julian's journal embossed on the cover. She opened the diary to the final page, reading the hurried, childish handwriting that described how he had finally found a secondary exit through a small window in the attic eaves, escaping the house safely, but leaving his beloved treasures behind in his panic. The realization washed over Ellie like a warm wave. Julian hadn't perished in these walls. The voice on the baby monitor wasn't a trapped spirit of tragedy, but a residual psychic echo, a manifestation of a lonely boy's intense wish to one day reclaim his lost childhood memories. A manifestation of a lonely boy's intense wish to one day reclaim his lost childhood memories was finally realized as Ellie lifted the tin box from the dust. The moment she pulled the capsule from the hidden alcove, a sudden, warm draft swept through the narrow passage, carrying away the bitter chill that had gripped the house for days. Back in the nursery, the baby monitor let out one final, remarkably clear sound, a soft, joyful laughter followed by a whispered, "Thank you, Ellie," that faded gently into beautiful, absolute silence. Ellie walked back through the opening into the sunlit room, her face covered in dust, but her eyes shining with a sense of profound relief. She collapsed into the rocking chair, clutching Julian's childhood diary to her chest as a dam broke inside her, allowing her to weep freely for the first time since her sister's passing. These tears were no longer born of empty despair, but of a deep, cathartic release, understanding that just as Julian's echo had been freed from the dark, she too could step out from the shadow of her own grief. Caleb sat quietly on the floor beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, witnessing the transformation of a haunted house into a sanctuary of healing. The heavy atmosphere that had defined room 204 was entirely gone, replaced by a light, hopeful energy that promised a brand new beginning. The light, hopeful energy that promised a brand new beginning transformed the entire atmosphere of the Victorian estate over the following weeks. With the mystery completely resolved and the supernatural chill gone, Ellie and Caleb worked tirelessly together to renovate the hidden space behind the nursery wall. Instead of sealing it back up, Caleb used his carpentry skills to widen the opening, installing a beautiful arched wooden doorway that connected room 204 to the newly discovered alcove. They painted the walls a warm, soft cream color, allowing the natural sunlight from the attic window to flood into what was once a dark, forgotten void. Ellie arranged Liam's toys and books inside the space, effectively turning the old architectural anomaly into a magnificent, sunlit playroom for her growing nephew. As they worked side by side, sanding floorboards and hanging bright curtains, Ellie found herself laughing again, the hollow emptiness in her chest gradually filling with genuine warmth. She realized she was no longer just going through the motions of survival. She was actively building a life, learning to accept Caleb's steady support and opening her guarded heart to the possibility of happiness. The house was no longer a monument to what she had lost, but a beautiful canvas for the family she was choosing to create. The family she was choosing to create took a beautiful, unexpected turn when Ellie decided to seek out the ultimate closure for the house's history. Utilizing the names found in the old town hall records, she managed to track down Julian himself, now an elderly, kind-faced man named Julian Vance, who coincidentally shared a distant lineage and lived peacefully in a quiet retirement community just 2 towns away.
Ellie extended a warm invitation, and a week later, the elderly man walked up the front steps of his childhood home, leaning heavily on a cane, but eyes wide with emotional recognition. Ellie led him up to the nursery, where Liam was happily playing in the newly renovated sunlit alcove. With tears welling in her eyes, Ellie presented Julian with the rusted tin box and the embroidered blue ribbon she had retrieved from the dark walls. Julian's hands shook as he touched his childhood diary, a profound expression of gratitude and wonder washing over his wrinkled face as decades of forgotten memories came rushing back to him. He wept softly, thanking Ellie for listening to the echoes of his past and for bringing his childhood treasures back into the light of day. Watching the elderly man find peace in the very room that had caused so much anxiety brought a deep, final healing to Ellie's own soul. A deep, final healing to Ellie's own soul arrived like a quiet blessing as the summer sun began to warm the valley of Willow Creek. Julian's visit had closed the final chapter on the house's mysterious past, leaving behind an environment that felt entirely safe, grounded, and full of life. The vintage baby monitor remained on the nursery dresser, but it no longer emitted strange breathing, cryptic warnings, or ghostly lullabies. Now, when Ellie held the receiver in the quiet hours of the evening, it transmitted nothing but the peaceful, steady rhythm of Liam's soft breathing and the gentle rustle of the summer breeze through the open window. The haunting static had transformed into a comforting guarantee of safety, a testament to the fact that the shadows had completely lost their grip on their lives. Ellie stood by the window of room 204, looking down at the front yard where Caleb was busy constructing a new wooden swing set for Liam. She felt a profound wave of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, realizing that the terrifying voice in the wall had actually been the catalyst she needed to snap out of her paralyzing grief. She was no longer a lonely guardian trapped in a house of sorrows. She was a confident woman standing on the threshold of a bright, beautiful future. She was a confident woman standing on the threshold of a bright, beautiful future. A reality that became tangibly real on a sunny Saturday afternoon in late July. Ellie and Caleb were sitting on the plush rug of the newly renovated playroom, watching Liam coil himself up using the edge of a small wooden activity table Caleb had crafted. Liam balanced precariously on his tiny feet, wobbling back and forth with a look of intense concentration on his chubby face, before letting go of the table entirely. With a wide, toothless grin, he took his very first independent steps across the sunlit floorboards, tumbling safely straight into Ellie's waiting, outstretched arms. Ellie cheered loudly, pressing a warm kiss against her nephew's forehead as Caleb laughed beside her, wrapping a supportive arm around her shoulders. The moment was a beautiful milestone, a vibrant contrast to the heavy, static-filled silence that had defined their first weeks in the house. It marked a definitive shift from a story shadowed by loss and supernatural mystery to a narrative brimming with life, family, and new beginnings.
Looking into Caleb's kind eyes and holding the laughing child in her lap, Ellie knew that the foundation of their new life was solid, built on a love that had proven strong enough to heal both the past and the present. Built on a love that had proven strong enough to heal both the past and the present, Ellie found a powerful new purpose in sharing her extraordinary journey with the rest of the world. Sitting at the wooden desk in the corner of her bedroom, she began typing the first chapters of a memoir, transforming her profound experiences into the written word. She wrote about the suffocating weight of grief, the terrifying isolation of her early days, and how an old baby monitor had forced her to confront both physical and emotional walls. Through her writing, she sought to comfort others who were navigating their own dark valleys of loss, explaining that the frightening voices we encounter in life are often just unhealed wounds crying out for acknowledgement and love. Caleb would often bring her fresh coffee while she wrote, offering quiet encouragement as he watched her turn her past vulnerabilities into a source of enduring strength for others.
Her manuscript grew day by day, a beautiful testament to resilience that proved healing was always possible if one had the courage to listen closely to the silences in life. The process of writing became her final act of closure, a way to permanently anchor her gratitude for the mysterious echo that had ultimately saved her small family. A way to permanently anchor her gratitude for the mysterious echo that had ultimately saved her small family, reached its beautiful completion one quiet evening exactly a year later. The manuscript of her book had finally been published, its cover proudly displaying a simple blue ribbon, but the true victory was the profound peace that now resided within the walls of the estate. Twilight cast a soft lavender glow across the nursery as Ellie walked in to check on Liam, who was tucked under his blanket, fast asleep with his favorite plush bear.
Caleb stood by the doorway, leaning against the frame with a gentle, proud smile, watching the woman who had completely transformed his world. Ellie walked over to the dresser where the vintage plastic baby monitor sat, its small green light glowing steadily in the dim room. For a long moment, she just listened to the perfect, uninterrupted stream of soft breathing filling the air. There was no static, no desperate whispers, and no leering sorrow, just the pure, beautiful sound of a safe and happy child. She realized then that the house had finally yielded its greatest lesson. The things that terrify us the most are often just unhealed wounds from the past, calling out into the dark for a little bit of love, acknowledgement, and closure. By finding the courage to listen instead of running away, she hadn't just freed a forgotten memory, she had broken the walls of her own isolation and built a real home. With a heart full of absolute contentment, Ellie reached down and gently flipped the switch, turning the baby monitor off. As the device went dark, she stepped into the hallway and slipped her hand into Caleb's, finally embracing the exquisite, healing beauty of the silence.